All right, let's talk about a real titan of industry, a company that was literally the symbol of American power, U.S. Steel. I mean, this was America's very first billion-dollar company, a giant that helped build the modern world as we know it. And now, it's being sold off.
You've got to see this contrast because it is just wild. Back in 1901, U.S. Steel was born in a deal that, adjusted for inflation, would be worth about $51 billion today. Now, flash forward to 2023, and this icon of American engineering is being sold for what one analyst called a yard sale discount. Ouch.
Just $14 billion. I mean, think about that for a second. This is the company that built parts of the UN headquarters, NASA's Kennedy Space Station, the San Francisco Bay Bridge. At its peak, this company wasn't just a player in the American steel market, it was the American steel market.
So that brings us to the big question, right? How on earth does a giant like this, a name that was once synonymous with American might, just fizzle out? Was it tough new competition? Was it some revolutionary technology they missed? Or did the people running the show just get lazy and fall asleep at the wheel?
Well, to find the answers, we got to rewind the clock, all the way back to the dawn of the 20th century. The Industrial Revolution was still roaring, and a few incredibly powerful guys saw a chance to build something the world had never, ever seen before.
Okay, so you basically had this dream team, or maybe a nightmare team, depending on your point of view. You had Andrew Carnegie, the absolute genius of steel production. You had J.P. Morgan, the money guy who could fund literally anything. Charles Schwab was the deal maker, the guy who could put it all together. And Elbert Gary was the sharp legal mind, the strategist.
So, the first move, and it was a huge one, was to buy out Andrew Carnegie. He was the king of steel, mostly because he was smart enough to adopt game-changing tech like the Bessemer converter way before anyone else. The deal that Schwab worked out made Carnegie one of the richest men on the planet and handed J.P. Morgan the crown jewel for his new empire.
But they didn't just stop with Carnegie Steel. Oh no, they went on an absolute shopping spree, basically stitching together all the other major steel companies into one. People at the time literally called it a Frankenstein's monster of capitalism, a single, massive beast designed for one thing: total domination.
And you know what? This Frankenstein's monster worked. It was a staggering success right out of the gate. U.S. Steel was on top of the world. But here's the thing. The very foundation of this empire, this thing built for pure dominance, had some serious cracks hiding just beneath the surface. Just get a load of this. In its very first year, U.S. Steel made 67%. That's 2/3 of all the steel in America. It was so big that Wall Street didn't even bother using its full name. They just called it the corporation. That's it.
To give you an idea how mind-bogglingly huge that is, think about Coca-Cola today. You can find Coke pretty much anywhere on Earth, right? Well, its market share is around 45%. U.S. Steel back then was way, way more dominant in its industry than even Coke is today.
But being that big puts a giant target on your back, especially with a trust-busting president like Teddy Roosevelt in the White House. So the chairman, Albert Gary, pulled off a brilliant move. He cut a quiet deal with the president to avoid getting broken up. And this gentleman's agreement? Well, it changed everything about the company.
And this right here, this is the crucial turning point in the whole story. U.S. Steel's game was no longer about innovation. It was about control. Gary started hosting these fancy dinners where he'd basically muscle competitors into fixing prices. The goal wasn't to be the best anymore. It was just to be the biggest and to keep things exactly as they were.
Okay, so let's jump forward in time to the era after World War II. This is where that culture of control really curdles into something dangerous, a deep, fatal sense of complacency.
You can see the decline here. It wasn't a sudden crash. It was more like a slow leak. The weird thing is, the whole market for steel was getting bigger and bigger, but U.S. Steel's piece of that pie just kept getting smaller and smaller, decade after decade. After the Second World War, America was making 60% of all the steel in the entire world, and U.S. Steel was the undisputed king of that mountain. They were fat, they were happy, and they felt totally invincible. They just couldn't imagine that anyone, especially not the bombed-out industries in places like Japan and Europe, could ever possibly catch up. And that feeling of being untouchable led to a colossal mistake. While U.S. Steel was just coasting along with its old tech, the same stuff that it made Carnegie rich decades earlier, a totally new, revolutionary way of making steel popped up overseas, the basic oxygen furnace. It was way faster, way cheaper, and made better steel.
And what did they do? They basically just ignored it. Seriously,
This was their big blockbuster video watching Netflix pop-up moment. By the time U.S. Steel finally got around to building one of these new furnaces, it was way too late. They'd already been completely left in the dust.
Falling that far behind on technology sent the company into an absolute tailspin. And that brings us to our last section here, looking at that painful decline and asking a tough question. Is a company like U.S. Steel just too nostalgic to make it in the modern world?
By the 1970s, the tables had completely turned. The student had become the master. Japan's furnaces were bigger, better, and way more efficient. And in a moment of just perfect irony, the American giant had to go ask its Japanese rival for help with its tech. And yeah, that rival was Nippon Steel, the very same company that's buying them today.
The only way to stay afloat was to shrink a lot. They had to slash over 150 facilities. The workforce was just gutted, dropping from over 170,000 people to a tiny fraction of that. It was a brutal downsizing just to survive.
Now, to be fair, they did manage to survive. A lot of their old American rivals, like Bethlehem Steel, went completely bankrupt. But the company that was left was just a shadow of its old self. It never got that innovative spark back. I mean, they only fully adopted modern mini-mill technology in 2020. 2020! And that brings us right back to today and this sale to Nippon Steel. It really leaves us with a fascinating and pretty tough question for the future of American industry. Is a company like U.S. Steel just a relic of the past that we should let go of? Or is what happens next a chance to revive a legendary American workforce? It's definitely something to think about.